can we get into what is copyright? Brian, would you like to give us a little bit of a breakdown around what copyright is? I know it's not a sexy topic, but we have to like try and just make sense of it.
I think I would define copyright as the exclusive right that creators have to the usage of their work. So it's an exclusive right that is granted, but that exclusive right is not absolute because there are exceptions that are given. Because the whole thing about copyright is to allow creativity on one side and society benefit on the other side. And what copyright tries to do is to strike a balance between those two interests, and those are the types of regulations that you come across. I must emphasize that copyright is only protectable in its expressed format. Mm-hmm. It's not expressed as the idea that sits in Brian's head. You have to express it in some way or the other and record it and keep it in order for it to be protectable. So I love storytelling, and I told a story to a friend, which I thought was a very good story. And 3 months later, I see them publishing it. And as a publisher, I was quite upset, and I said, what can I do about this? And I was in a position to realize there's very little that I could do about it because I didn't perform it on a stage, I didn't record it, I didn't keep it anywhere. It was gone, and it was there. So if you have a good idea that you think is worth protecting, express it in one form or the other, write it, record it, date it, keep it somewhere, and it becomes protected that way. You don't have to register it. Just the expression and being able to prove that it's your work is enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I
Bring it to DALRO.
yes, yeah, that's key. I think what we always find is that we need to be, as authors of original text or original artistic work, it's important to remember to save the drafts and to be able to, for the worst case scenario where you're in a situation where you need to prove that you're actually the owner, is be able to, like if you're a visual artist, photograph the progression of the work. If you're a script writer, email the work to yourself so you have a dated sort of post stamp on the work.
Email it to DALRO.
Email it to DALRO. I also hear stories about DALRO getting a little bit of a portal where things can be put at some point. So stay tuned for that at some point. But I think what is also important is that copyright doesn't last forever.
No.
Yeah. So why is it only, how long is it now actually?
Well, it's as long as it's always been in South Africa. It lasts for 50 years after the death of the author, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And there are different types, but I think the most general way of putting it is that 50 years after the death of the author, then the copyright stops to subsist. But there are exceptions, like I say, sometimes if it's not published before the death of the author, you can imagine then that if only published after the author dies, how do you count the death of the author? Doesn't count. So it will be from the date of the publication of the copyright. There are other examples, but generally speaking, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 50 years was because it was supposed to survive for 2 generations back in 1864, if anybody from the Bern Convention academic. So, I mean, essentially, we then got penicillin, and now people last a lot longer. So, but I think also engage with DALRO around estate planning. I mean, it's very important when copyright lasts 50 years after your death to think about what's going to happen to your work after you die. Who's going to own it? Who's going to be benefiting from the many royalties as your death now increases the value of your work? I mean, these are important things to think about, and I mean, they're not very easy, but they're important. But I mean, we've spoken about what various things, like anything that's written down on paper or anything that's put down, nothing that's in your head. And also, there's no quality for originality, not for necessarily for origin. It needs to be original, but it doesn't necessarily have to be good.
No, unfortunately not.
There's no threshold for quality for something to be copyright protected. So nobody's going to be adjudicating whether something is worth being copyright protected.
It just has to be yours and original.
Exactly.
Original, yeah.
But what is copyright usage? We speak about the copyright user. Like, are these people that are just pulling things from libraries and then running off with them? I mean, what is the copyright user?
Yeah, I think that gives me an opportunity to deal with something that is rather irritating. I am involved in debates on copyright that happens at the UN in Geneva, the World Intellectual Property Organization. And many people tend to say copyright is un-African. That's one of the arguments that we come across. And I think sometimes we forget what we are talking about. Because if I give you an example of what happened in traditional society, for example, in West Africa, you would have the griot. And in Southern Africa, you would have the imbongi or nyanduri. And these were people who, when others were going to their fields and looking after their cattle, they stayed behind and curated the knowledge of that community, put it together, whether it was izibongo or praises and the history of that community. It was understood by that community that this person is deriving his livelihood from there because they cannot participate with others in the other activities that are commercial or to look after themselves. So that person was looked after in the king's crown. It was the responsibility of the king on behalf of the people to look after that person because the work they did was recognized as vital to those people. There's no difference to today. Those people benefited from the performances. The user in this case is a reader like me. It's like a person in a university. It's like a university that wants to put a package together that they can use among their learners. And that's where DALRO becomes critical because I think we have left the stage where books were consumed, for example, in their totality. Now they are consumed in bites and in small chunks. And the putting together of those chunks, if you are not protected by an organization like DALRO, could actually happen without compensation to you. So as they do those compilations, you need to make sure that you are represented. Other users could be fellow publishers. I like something that is in a book that you have published. I want to include part of it in a book. I come to you for permission to use that, and I include it in there. So users are quite a myriad of the utilization of copyright, and you need to make sure that no matter how segregated, separated, chunked up it is, its bits and pieces are protected wherever they are used. Yeah.
No, I mean, we mentioned earlier around the various stakeholders. It goes from school to auction houses to book publishers to users within universities, etc. So it's quite a wide array of copyright users. But I also want to understand this difference between intellectual property and physical property. So like surely, if we're looking at the idea of infringement, okay, so that's essentially the use of something that I don't own, or that I don't own the intellectual property without permission. But surely, if I own a Blessing Gobeni piece and it's sitting in my dining room and I want to now include it in my own sort of publication, I own the work, why can't I include it in my own publication?
Because you don't own the copyright in that. When you buy a piece of art, like as you say, Blessings, that is Blessing Gobeni, and there's another fantastic piece in the boardroom by Blessing. If you, before you leave, please go take a look at it. But when you purchase that piece, you only purchase in the physical piece. The copyright in that piece stays with the author, with Blessing. He owns that, and you can't just take it, put it on T-shirts for your family reunion and give it to your family members without his permission. You've got to ask for his permission. That's where we come in. That we, as DALRO, we handle Blessing's permissions on his behalf. Because guess what? Where do we want Blessing? In the studio, crafting his artwork, rather than, on the phone, giving permissions to people. So yes, so you do need permission in order to do that. Do not put Blessing's work on your coffee mugs for Christmas presents without his permission. That is wrong.
No, I think I've always told people, if you're unsure, come to DALRO. I mean, it's as simple as thinking that if you walk into a bookshop and you buy a play and you think you can just perform it, that's not the case. You own the book. You don't own the right to perform it. So always come to DALRO just to double check whether you're allowed to do something. But just to close us off, I wanted to find out if there's anything else that you wanted to touch on around copyright that you feel like the audience should know.
I just wanted to add something important, which is the moral rights. and that is the right to be duly associated and acknowledged for your work. Whether it is cited by others or used by others, you need to be recognized as that. Even if you sell that copyright to somebody else, moral rights cannot be alienated from you. They remain. And it also something that protects you from defilement of your work, and to get to a point where you can really say, this is no longer my work, and therefore I don't want to be associated with that. I'll give a quick example. Jonathan Zapiro drew a cartoon which he called Evolution, where we started as monkeys, and at our best we were Nelson Mandela. And then we started declining into monkeys again. I don't want to mention somebody's name, but we ended up as monkeys. And what some minister did, I won't mention their name, was to take that cartoon and they remove all the parts up to Nelson Mandela and take it away and leave the decline into monkeyhood, and then claim that this is what Zapiro thinks about black people. Now, that was a clear misrepresentation of what Zapiro meant. It was a defilement of his work, and I am surprised that he didn't act on it. But that's what we call moral rights, the integrity of your work, being associated with your work in the form that you intended, and not to be abused and still be attributable to you like that. I just thought that would be important to mention.